plenty of time to connect up at the reception tonight at 5 o'clock, where we can debrief, have a beer, glass of wine, water, whatever your preference is. But in the meantime, we have a really awesome luncheon keynote speaker. And I feel like if we had planned this to set it up for what you want to talk about in a way, I couldn't have done it any better. We ended this morning's keynote with a conversation around how do we use generative AI for the good? I mean, how do we think about that? And there's a conversation clearly around data ethics and all of those things, but we're so fortunate to have I-Sah Hsieh here today to talk to us. He is the Principal Social Innovation Manager for SAS's data ethics practice and has done a lot nationally, has graduated from Cornell, has really managed transformational projects around the country. Most notably, he's on the board of directors for the Spiritual Twist Productions and will unfortunately be leaving later today because it teaches performing arts to 300 children, and you've got a show tonight. Around 8-year-olds.
We do, that's right.
So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. We have the next hour, and so he's going to talk, and if there's some questions, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Melissa. Okay, yeah, I can't stay very long, and I wish I could, but I wouldn't have missed this event. So I woke up at 3 this morning, flew in from Raleigh, North Carolina. Thankfully, the weather cooperated, and there were no delays, but as the more I learn about what you guys are doing here today, I think the more excited I'm getting because, you know, when else in history have people embarked on something, on an area, at least not in my world, where there are no best practices, right? like you know, and in the corporate sector, we joke a lot about, oh, are you leading edge? No, I'm bleeding edge. It's like, yeah, I can't think of a sharper edge to be on than the AI edge right now. So I mean this, and as I look at just the people gathered in this room, I mean literally, truly, you know, if we do this right collectively, we'll be able to look back in history and be like, wow, something special happened in San Antonio that literally steered, you know, just the way AI is used in the world. So. Sorry, I wasn't planning to say all that before I said hello. My name is I-Sah Hsieh. I'm with SAS, and just a quick 30-second elevator pitch. SAS, some of you might know us as SAS, you know, from the statistical analysis software that you used decades ago. We started 46 years ago as a humble little statistical analysis software package, but in the last 5 decades, we've grown into, you know, the largest privately held software company in the world, I think, at one point recently, 5th largest software company in the world, and you know, analytics, data, AI. Like, okay, we're like, hey, we've waited 5 decades for this moment, and it's here, right? And so, for me personally, I've been at the company for 20 years. I've spent the last 15 years leading starting and leading our Data for Good program, which I'm still very passionate about. And that kind of became the genesis of our responsible innovation program and mantra. And I'm so thankful. I actually give thanks every day that I get to work for a company that will invest, that will pay me to do good in the world with AI and analytics and data, right? And ask me to tell about it. And as we look at where we're going as a society, right? Well, let's talk a little bit about trust today. And again, trustworthy AI, again, I deal a lot with the corporate folks. A lot of times they think, oh, trustworthy AI, that sounds an awful lot like a nice way to say you're gonna just add a lot of bureaucracy to my work. Is that right? Right, but you know, I think if we take a step back and look, trust, we all know, is just the fabric of all of our relationships, right? It's at the core of everything. Just like you're trusting that chair that you're sitting in to hold you, you're trusting the people around you to not make today intolerable for you. That's why you're willing to come and sit down next to them, right? There's a certain measure of trust in everything that we do. When we look at AI, you know, let's just get really practical, right? If somebody hands you some analysis, enrollment numbers, predictions, whatever, you want to be able to trust those numbers, right? And when you get questioned about it, or if you have questions about it, you want to be able to trust the people that gave it to you. And we also want to be trustworthy to the people that we serve. So, I like this guy because I think there's a little bit of this guy in each and every single one of us when someone says, hey, what are we going to do about generative AI, right? Because you know what, it's kind of it's a messy time right now. You know, some of the problems in technology and AI, we've created ourselves, you know, as a society, as we rush to just innovate, and not necessarily think about some of the ramifications of some of the things that we're putting out there, right? But some of these problems we inherited, but we're kind of at this point where we have to decide collectively, as a group, what are we going to do with these problems, whether we created it or whether we inherited it. Are we going to perpetuate some of these mistakes of the past and some of these issues, or are we going to be the ones to be able to transform it, right? Because we hear an awful lot. And it's okay, it's honest. We understand how people would feel this way. These are just some of the recent headlines, right? And these are some pretty serious things, you know, Taylor Swift and deep fake porn pictures about her, or fake robocalls from Biden. But let's make this a little more personal, shall we, right? Instead of Taylor, it could be any one of your female students or male students, any one of your students here in the UT system, right? Instead of Biden, it could be someone impersonating to be any of you to your students. So like, we've got to take this seriously. And I guess this is just the way it is, human nature. You know, we love to hear the bad news, but no one's talking about all the good stuff in the world, right? The potential. But I think we're all here because we know this. You know, I attended the United Nations AI for Good Summit last summer, and I just loved. They had this one person speaking, and I forget his name, but he said, you know what? Think of a world where, you know, we're at that point where AI is good enough to where, what if every student in this world had a personalized AI tutor that could understand their learning style, to understand where they were strong, where they were not, right? And how awesome would that be, right? You know, and it just, I don't know. Ideas like that get me really excited. What's that? Almost a record. So here's actually a prediction that our friends across the pond in Britain, the British Council, I think, said 65% of today's students will be employed in a job that doesn't exist yet. That blows my mind. I can't wrap my brain fully around that yet. But you know what? There are people making money off YouTube channels and followers, right? And gaming. And, you know, I wish that was real when I was a younger kid, you know? But, all right, but let's talk about what's happening right now. The mood of, let me back up. My agenda for today is just to give you a sense of where are we with AI, right? So I spent the last 15 years of my career on the front row of analytics, data, AI, and I get to kind of, with my Data for Good projects, kind of be at that place where theory kind of comes to life a little bit and meets a little practice. And it's not always fun, and it's not always pretty, it's messy, right? And it's okay, but that's where innovation happens. So I wanted to give you a state of, a quick primer on where are we? We're in the AI world. So forgive me if some of this is just review for you. Talk a little bit about the policy landscape that is just happening around the world, that your students will be stepping into. Talk a little about AI and the workforce, and then share with you a little bit about SAS's approach and what we're evangelizing. And I promise this is not a commercial for our company. You'll see very little product, you hear very little product. But for me, you know, we were one of 6 companies, private sector companies, invited to the launch of the AI Safety Institute, because we've been told, okay, your approach is different than most technology companies, SAS. Like, it's a very thoughtful approach, it's a very holistic approach, because it's really not about the technology at all. I mean, yes, that's important, right? But it's nothing without the people and the processes as well to go with it. So that's my goal. My confession to you is that I mashed together 5 different presentations and 5 different talk tracks because Melissa wouldn't say no to anything that I kept throwing out. So I think something's got to resonate for you guys, but I'm just going to lay in front of you what I call the Chinese menu, and then we can pull on any of these threads during your questions, which is really my favorite part of the interaction. Okay, so back to the stats, right? The acceptance of innovation is at stake, right? Because of all the bad news that we keep hearing about. You know, like this is from the Edelman Trust Barometer. Anybody familiar with the Edelman Trust Barometer? Edelman is the largest PR firm in the world. And they do every year this international study, and they've done it for about 20 years. And I've never really given it much thought or credence until all of a sudden trust has become really important, right? And again, trust isn't just important in AI, but think about it from this perspective. I heard a guy from the Atlantic Council say, trust is what will differentiate companies in today's market, right? Just think about that. Even before AI came out, you know, you remember like all these Super Bowl commercials one year, all of a sudden were you know, it went from, I don't know, I just felt this big shift in a short amount of time from a lot of like, you know, it gave one vibe, and then the next year everybody's out hugging puppies and doing good, and because everybody's trying to, right, capture that need for people to want to trust. But innovation is at stake here. But this is something that we've been tracking a lot, the Edelman Trust Barometer. So again, this is an international study, and they survey people from all around the world, 20 countries, I think, is the base. And they're looking at, okay, how much do people trust government, media, NGOs, and business? And what's really interesting is, so right now, the latest survey says, you know what, business is considered competent and ethical. NGOs have moved into the competent and ethical. They were not there last year, right? But media and government, right, they're in the wrong quadrant. What was interesting was last year, business was the only one that people trusted. And when I played with this data pre-pandemic, it was the other way around. People didn't trust business. But you know, government was way up there, right? And again, this is Edelman talking, the largest PR firm in the world. But what this tells us is this: like, if everybody moves to the left side of that, you know, of this graph, we're in trouble as a society, right? And so it's good that businesses are there. It's good that NGOs have joined this year. But you know, look out. We've got to be careful because business right now are the ones with the budget, and for AI, and AI has the ability to erode trust at scale, right? We've seen it. So Microsoft is getting sued by the Times for how they're training, and you know, like there's just, everybody's trying to figure it out, and it's a little bit of a hot mess, as we like to say. But you know what? Let me take you on a quick journey. Yeah, before we look at the future, we have to see where we came from, right? So can we just go back to like, you know, let's go back a few decades. 1988, you know, is where this timeline starts, right? Like AI's been around. But what has changed? So in 1988, yeah, you know, these systems showed some gender bias there at St. George's Hospital. You know, this one in 2009, I remember distinctly. I was living in Silicon Valley at the time, and I was like, hey, Nikon's playing with some facial recognition stuff, but it thought that Asian faces were white people blinking. And I remember like, okay, hey, gotta start somewhere. That's great, right? So then as we keep going though, and look at all that was happening actually, you know, and this was even before ChatGPT was released. That little breakdown there, I think, is when the large learning models started coming out. But you know, all of a sudden, I feel like AI has gone from being this butter knife in my drawer. You know, it's a great tool. It automates a lot of things that humans used to take a lot of time doing, you know, more repetitive tasks. It's gone from being a butter knife to somewhat of a chainsaw. Right? And I'm not trying to be dramatic, but I have 5 kids. 4 of them are girls, right? All of a sudden, I have to have conversations with my daughters about, hey, you know not to take relationship advice from that chat bot that your social media app just rolled out, right? Because, you know, as people test it, these chat bots, you know, are saying, literally, we're saying to this institute that was testing AI safety, nonpartisan institute. And this chatbot, as they went in and pretended to be a 13-year-old girl, was encouraging her, like, oh yeah, I'm so glad you found a guy. Really? He's 18 years older than you? Oh, I'm so glad you're happy. We just want you to be happy. And it's like, so, so what has changed, right? It used to be when we would go and do a Google search, everything used to be textual, right? But now we've got the ability to, the inputs are different. It's not just text anymore, right? Like, look at this example from our friends at Google. I can throw up a picture and be like, wow, those look good. Hey, give me a recipe for these cookies, will you? And it'll do it, right? I have a friend who works at our company in R&D for generative AI, but also teaches at a university, a local university to us, and she used generative AI, and it made this stunning picture of her, like so real. I was like, how did you get it to look so real? She's like, oh, that's easy. I just fed it pictures of me. I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense, right? But like, we're not used to that, right? So this multimodality is what's changing, and also, right, with large learning models, this is that new flavor, new flavor of AI, where we finally have taught it how to learn, and but the difference now is that it thinks it's right all the time, right? And by the way, this idea of hallucinations, actually, I was talking to my friend, in preparation for talking to you, I just sat down with all my friends who were both, generative AI technologists who also teach at universities, and I just picked their brain like, okay, talk to me. And she's like, actually, the idea of hallucinations was predicted in the 1960s by one of the lesser known, linguists and computer scientists, and so some of these concepts are not necessarily new. But I share this slide with you, and this is an interesting one. As we start to let AI make more decisions for us, right? The risk landscape starts to shift. You have regulatory risks, societal risks, and operational risks, and all of that, right? Depending on what you're doing and where you are, starts to take on a different shape. This was done by our friends. We took this from Stephen Teal, who was over at Accenture. He's actually going to start working for SAS and join us in meetings next week. So I'm super excited that one of my heroes is coming to be with us. So here's a slide that I took so that you know that I'm not just talking to myself and my friends, but Tom Liu, who is the general counsel and head of governance at Google DeepMind, says, hey, here are the key AI trends that he sees, right? Pace of innovation is increasing, right? You've got the multi-purpose, multimodal AI systems that we were talking about, right? Things are going international. It's almost like a new, arms race, so to speak, from an AI perspective, right? There's a lot of large private sector capital being dumped into it. And actually, I just need to say this now. This is where we need voices of reason, from you guys, all of us together. What we're seeing right now in the private sector, and I get to talk to, Fortune 500 executives internationally as well. What we're seeing a lot of is everybody saying, oh, if we don't use a large learning model and show that we're using a large learning model, we're not considered innovative. Right, so they've got this giant sledgehammer and they're just whacking everything, with an LLM, just to show that they're innovative. When it's like, and this example that I just came across this week, it's like, you know what? We can solve that problem with a $5,000 piece of software, good old-fashioned, text analytics, natural language processing, right? You don't need Microsoft Copilot or this really super expensive environment to solve that problem. So that's kind of the frenzy right now, the feeding frenzy, the state of where we are. So all that just to say, right, things are getting faster, everything's getting bigger. Do you know that the compute power, I heard a stat, the compute power since 2016, 2020, let's say, has increased by 10 billion fold, and apparently it doubles and turns over every 5 to 6 months. It's like, what? I can't even wrap my brain around that, right? So innovation, compute power continues to get stronger. It's going to be able to do more and more. We've got this LLM, that is pretty amazing in its own way, right? It's it's able to teach itself now. So it wasn't trained in a particular language, but since they got so good at teaching it how to learn, now all of a sudden it's predicting and making accurate predictions in other languages. That's a little, okay, that's interesting, right? But yet, and I won't name it right now, but there was a published white paper right before in December of this last year, right before they released a new version of one of the leading large learning models. They had their best and brightest people bang away at this just to see where the flaws were. And they said, hey, they'd asked us some questions, and for me, and again, I'm not a programmer, an AI programmer, but again, I've been around, I've been in the field for 20 years, and as I watch it, so I can appreciate and understand it, so as these people try to break this LLM and find where the faults are, when I explain what a large learning model is to non-technical folks, I just say, you know what? It's really a next best word guesser. And it's pretty darn good at it, right? We've trained it on all the data out on the internet, good or bad, right or wrong, and it's really good at guessing next best word. But when you give it a question like, what is the 8th letter in the word deforestation? It'll come back and say, oh, that's easy. The answer is O. It's like, actually, it's not. Oh, I'm sorry, the answer is S. Actually, no, it's not. Oh, then it must be, and it just got it wrong 3 times in a row. The letter is T, by the way, if I counted correctly, right? Yeah, right. But that'll get fixed. But we just have to understand the limits of the technology that we're working with. Use it for, and that's why what you do is so important, right? Just trying to help this next generation figure out when to use it, when not to use it. Okay, let's pause, or let's shift real quick and talk about the policy landscape. So SAS, we do business in 138 countries around the world, and we're really trying to keep a close eye on all the regulations as it relates to AI. And some of you may have heard, this was the big news in our world, the EU AI Act finally got approved, all 237 pages of it. And it's crazy, because one little paragraph in that 237-page document can spin off a whole entire industry of, okay, wow, we have to prove what to regulators, and okay, now we need all these checks, systems, balances, and so on and so forth. Right? So what we're expecting is just like what the Europeans did for data privacy with GDPR standards. They're going to be kind of the gold standard for a lot of the world as it relates to AI regulations. But more close to home. And here's another graph, real quick, just to give you a sense of, all the governments coming on board, because they see the importance of protecting their citizens from AI-driven fraud, from just trying to help them be competitive in the world as well. And so, but they're trying to just strike that balance, right, of supporting innovation while protecting their people. So for us at SAS, the head of our data ethics practice, Reggie, he sits on the White House's AI Advisory Council. It's called NIAC, and they had submitted recommendations to the president that led to his executive order that he signed recently, and that was kind of neat. We got to be in the room. We got to when the president signed the executive order. I mentioned earlier we were one of the 6 private sector organizations invited to the signing of the AI Safety Institute consortium with Secretary Mayorkas, but we're doing stuff around the world just to, for us, it's not about lobbying in that traditional sense of lobbying that people think, private sector companies do. But for us, it's about keeping AI human-centric, right? We've got to do that because, if we do that right, right, then everything else kind of falls into place. It's kind of like, every day I talk to somebody who will say, oh man, I'm so scared about this new AI stuff because I heard this story and I heard that story. But I think of it kind of like a car, right? Like any other tool. Cars, we're not going to give up our cars, even though cars are used sometimes to commit crimes or to, it's just a tool, and tools can be used for a lot of good or not good. All right, let me, so AI in the workforce. Let's talk a little about that. So I showed this slide earlier, right? There's so much promise to AI. I mean, which researcher would not want to be able to say to AI, hey, can you, if they can trust it, can you just simulate this 200 million times and come back with the best answer for me, right? Like, I mean, it's just so exciting. The OECD had issued a report saying, hey, here's some of the sectors that we think will be most affected. You know, there's a lot of concern about AI taking white-collar jobs, right? So if you read a little deeper into this report, you know, it kind of breaks it out into waves and what their predictions are. So you've got transport that they think will get impacted a lot with a lot of autonomous vehicles and whatnot. Although, did anybody see the news headline about Waymo and crowds, you know, kind of vandalizing the Waymo autonomous cars in San Francisco? Again, that whole trust thing, right, comes into play there. But financial services, all sectors, health, you know, I mean, if we're going, it's really important to get AI right. But we definitely, we definitely need to get it right in the areas of health and financial services, right? And that's focus area for me for this coming year with some of my projects. So the skills gap, 51% of companies report a lack of skilled AI talent. Okay, and so when we ask them to say, hey, what are your biggest priorities, you know, it's kind of interesting to see that it is evenly distributed. It's not just the technical skills, right? But it's also those that understand the regulation and AI governance and security, right? And the ethics. And so this is both for technical and non-technical. And I think AI, one thing that has really impressed me as I look at the agenda for your conference is, and this is something we preach, it's easy to say, very hard to do, but you guys are doing it, which is this multidisciplinary approach to AI, right? To be able to all just get in the room. No more than we want just a group of lawyers making decisions about what to do and what you can and can't do with AI, or we don't want just a group of technologists, and we saw that kind of with social media, right? Just it was only technologists in the room. I wasn't in the room, so I can't say for sure, right? But this is my guess, knowing how the private sector works. It's like, hey, my job is to write an algorithm that'll keep people on our platform as long as possible, right? But what we're seeing now is like the importance of this multidisciplinary, a lot of voices in the room, right? The more diversity we have in the groups, the better. Technical, non-technical. So I love being able to see professor of mathematics and English and so forth on these panels as you guys talk about generative AI. Okay, so this might be interesting to this group. So it's like, all right, well, where are you going to get your AI skills from? As we ask 1,000 different IT executives. And we didn't do this. We didn't do this poll and survey, but you know, 68% said, "Hey, we're going to upskill, just train the in-house talent." Right? Half of them, 49%, said they were going to recruit from universities. Yeah. And so, as you think about the curriculums that you want to build, and the skills that you want to build, so all this just to say, as I talk to my friends who are technologists as well as educators, as I speak to executives around the world, here are some of the things that I've come to realize. I'm trying to make this as practical as possible. So this, but you can put in parentheses, this is I-Sah's opinion, okay? Right, some of the key skills. It was interesting to me as I talked to technologists, generative AI technologists who are also teaching. They're like, you know what? Critical reading skills. Right? AI right now, today, generative AI is still not at that place where if you have good critical reading skills, you can tell, like, you know what, this doesn't quite sound like a human put it together. You know, and so that's kind of the foundation, because one thing that we, SAS, had posed when we were invited to the Senate to talk about, okay, what do we need to do with this AI safety summit and executive order? AI literacy for everybody, right? That's really important, just so that people know what they can trust, what they can't. What are the limits of this thing that you've put in front of me, right? Where did the data come from? Is it biased at all? Like being able to just critically pull it apart, and then that multidisciplinary approach to AI, which again, I applaud you guys for doing so well already. So let me just take a step into some of this AI literacy ideas and concepts that everybody can use. I'll dip a toe into some of the more data science-y things that we're doing without getting too technical in the time I have remaining. How am I doing on time, Melissa? Am I okay? So this is a pretty easy example, right? If you have a training data set that looks like this, and these are all pictures of policymakers, it's not going to extrapolate, right? to include a population like this, or this, or this, right? And we know that. We've heard that. We've seen that in the news. But then, once we properly train it, now all of a sudden, this came out last week, didn't it? Right? So if you ask it to generate a picture of the Founding Fathers, it puts a black man in the background there. If you ask it to generate an illustration of a 1943 German soldier, well, that's not historically accurate, right? So again, we're finding the limits of where we are today, And a lot of times when we say bias, people they say, oh yeah, we have to learn about bias like it's one thing. But if you actually break it down, the science of bias, and there's all of these different types of biases at every step of the way. So what you see here, what you're looking at here is, and forgive us for making it sound fancier than it is, the data chain of custody, which is just, okay, when you're going to analyze data, what do? You grab the data, you stage and prepare it, and you analyze and consume it, right? But when you map out these processes, there are all these different types of biases along the way. And we just need to train this next generation of human beings to be able to say, okay, and I like to try to break it down as simple as possible. Okay, I'm looking at this analysis, I'm looking at this model. Who's left out? Who's not included here, right? And just being able to ask a couple of thoughtful questions like that, I think is a great start from an AI literacy standpoint. Okay, now let's talk a little more about deploying and governing what we call trustworthy AI. So this is a little more of my day-to-day. So about 5 years ago, we at SAS saw the writing on the wall and the importance of being able to govern our AI. Everything that we use as a company, because we saw it, right? And from the HR, and you guys hear it too, HR, all the different aspects of the operations of the organization globally, as well as for us, we also create AI tools that our customers and Fortune 500 companies use. And so we broke it down into 4 main pillars, right? So oversight, which is where all of our, and then by the way, I'm sharing with you, this is the model that we use and deploy internally, and it was greatly helpful for us. Thankfully, we already had something like this in place, our AI governance model in place, so that when generative AI came out, right, a little over a year ago, it disrupted everybody, it disrupted us. But we were able to say, okay, let's go through the process of coming up with a generative AI policy for the organization, and we were able to put it out in time and just roll with that disruption, right? Because generative AI will not be the last disruption. Can we agree on that? We're still reeling from that, we're figuring it out, but we've got to build our programs and our curriculums and our kids, right, that are resilient enough to say, okay, this is the current disruption, but then how do we handle future disruptions? So this is what we use internally, and it's working out well for us. One pillar is oversight. That's where we have a collection of all of our C-level executives who are making decisions, casting the vision, answering the hard questions of, okay, do we or do we not do this? Right? Do we or do we not take this deal for how this organization, how this government wants to use our tools for AI, right? You have to figure out who you are and what you want to do or not do. Second is controls, and that's where you come up with the KPIs, and I would put the regulatory stuff in there, right? But you also use controls is where you figure out, where you carry out the vision from your leadership. And turn them into KPIs and measurable outcomes. Culture is important, as we know, right? But for us, we're trying to make ethical inquiry second nature to our employees. And so for me, what I love is my Data for Good projects. We did a project down in the Galapagos last year around sea turtles, right? So actually, we did 3 projects down there. But I'll tell you about the sea turtle one. The iconic Galapagos sea turtle. Did you know that a sea turtle's markings on the side of their face is like a fingerprint, right? And what you have are two scientists that swim around the Galapagos. Pretty cool job. We swim around the Galapagos, take pictures of sea turtles, and then, well, first they have to pull sometimes these 300-pound sea turtles into the boat, take a picture, and then say, have we seen this sea turtle before? You know, they're just looking at pictures. So we said, hey, can we bring some computer vision alongside you and just help you do that faster? And by the way, there are 350,000 visitors to the Galapagos every single year who also have cameras. Can we have them contribute to your repository of pictures, right? And so that was a great project, and we did it. But before we even wrote the first line of code for the facial recognition algorithm for the sea turtles, what we had our Data for Good volunteers do was write an algorithm that would strip out any PII, any personally identifiable information. No kids in swimming suits, you know, no researcher faces, nothing. Just strip all that out, right? So again, just trying to flex these muscles and help them, you know, start thinking about some of these things before they just go attack the problem at hand. Okay, and then lastly, for us, we call it platform, but for every other organization, it could be operations, right? So this is where, how is AI? How are these AI systems implemented in our organization, and how do we keep track of them? You know, ever since AI hit the news, every single boardroom has been talking about AI. To the best of my knowledge, not a single one of them yet can look at a single place and say, okay, where's all the AI used in my organization? Which ones are high risk? Which ones are not? Right? That's where we are. And I was in Europe last May, and one of the largest insurance companies came up to me and said that exact thing. Like, hey, we have had data governance for years. We have had no AI governance. Right? And so for us, we were able to say, well, here's what we do, you know, and we're, again, SaaS, we are a software company. We're not in the business of management consulting, but we're being dragged into there, and just to share our experiences, like, hey, this is what works for our international organization, and people are starting to say, yeah, this is great. So we've actually this year formed, as part of our data ethics practice, a small group that will go and provide just a little advisory, just to get people set on the right course, on the course that you guys are on. Okay? And if you break it out, again, this is when we go through these exercises and what these pillars mean, you know, you have to start with some real, like, philosophical, existential questions, right? Like, okay, well, how do we as an organization define AI? Right? Do we only care about generative AI, or are we talking about anything that automates something that a human would do? Those are two very different standards, right? But you got to figure out where you're going to put the stick in the ground. You got to figure out what you will and won't do. You know, but right now these are just words on a web page and words on a slide. But as an organization, where the rubber meets the road is, okay, like this insurance company I was telling you about. I said to them, hey, you say a lot on your website about innovation and how that's important to you. How does how you handle your AI systems and deploy your AI systems show how innovative you are? And so for the first time, they kind of got quiet, and they just like, oh, yeah, those are dots that we really have to connect, right? So just asking thoughtful questions like that. Okay, so that's kind of the framework for governing AI. Now you lay on top of that all the capabilities that an organization needs to create and deploy trustworthy AI, right? Data management, mitigation, managing the models and the operations. And so this is a little bit, so when I take those two slides I just showed you, one for the 4 pillars and one for all the capabilities, and mash them together, this is kind of what it looks like. So if you think about, and again, I'm not just talking to the data science folks and the techies here, right? But any executive that needs to make decisions, right? You need to know that when the data that's used for these reports that are being put on your desk, right? You need to be able to ask some thoughtful questions like, hey, how are we managing, you know, what kind of biases are in this data? So, for example, some of the capabilities we're building to help make this easier for organizations to manage are, in the data management realm, there's something that'll tag a piece of data so that you can know, hey, is this piece of data public, private, you know, questionable? And everywhere that piece of data gets used, right, that label follows it, so that, you know, before I say, hey, go make this public, I see that tag right there, like, oh no, there's some sensitive data in there. Let's not, right? Fairness and bias assessments. Being able to just, before you deploy a model, a lot of times companies will say, hey, we made this model, we tested it for accuracy, we tested it for efficiency, and that's great. But they haven't taken the extra step to test for, okay, well, which demographics are kind of left out? So we're trying to help automate that process, right? And building into it some of these new regulations, the EU AI Act, and there are all these security frameworks and best practice standards for AI and AI rules and how to deploy that. So we're trying to build that into the technology to kind of walk people through, whether you're a technical or non-technical person. And by the way, we look at that like, yes, we're doing good. We do believe that we're doing good. But the industry analysts say that AI governance is also going to be a $2 billion market industry, right, by 2030. So this is a situation where for us, we're trying to do good, as well as do well, from a business standpoint to be able to keep the lights on, right? And this is the last of my technical portion. So this idea of something called model cards, which is a really elegant way to solve that problem of helping executives figure out, okay, where are my AI models again, and what is the health of that model? So for example, all a model card is, it's kind of like the ingredient list or the nutrition label on your food, right? But for AI models. So you'll be able to go in there, both technical and non-technical folks, and be able to say, okay, well, what is the health of this model? When was it created? What data did we use? Where did the data come from? Right? Be able to look and say, hey, has this model drifted at all? What we call drift, right? Because, and a great example of drift is any models about human behavior before the pandemic were probably significantly out of date after the pandemic, right? And so when you don't have that drastic of a, event like a pandemic, at which point do your models start to not be accurate enough? So that's what model cards do. We built that last year based on the success of that and how it was received by our customers in the industry. We're now building, even more capabilities around like data cards to get even more granular for those that work an awful lot with data and don't want to get in trouble. When I talk to executives from around the world, they all say, there's one thing I can always count on them saying when I ask them, hey, what's really important to you? And right now, they're saying, we want defendable decisions, right? We need defendable decisions, right? And so all this transparency that you need, and now that the regulations are requiring from an AI standpoint, can be there. All right, and then just since you guys are talking so much about generative AI, trustworthy large learning models. So I love this, right? Because now we're going to use some AI to make sure that the AI is calibrated okay, right? And it's good, right? It's a checks and balances kind of thing. Because right now the state of the industry is, I was talking to somebody from another large tech firm who's a friend of mine. He's like, oh yeah, we're just kind of going in and programming, we're implementing this for this customer, but we have to go in and program by hand, like all of the things that we will and will not let them enter into a large learning model, because there's a lot of corporate secrets, right? Or like your secret sauce as an organization. People just don't know. They're like, hey, this large learning model, how about I just dump in my existing code and ask it to come back with something a little bit better or a little sharper? But now you just released your corporate secrets, right? Into this big hole that you can't get back, and now it's out there. So being able to put some gates and balances, monitor for bias, toxicity, scan for private data, all that good stuff. Can I just end real quick with a good example of AI? So this comes to us from Florida for one of the community colleges. They realized that they had thousands of students who were within 15 hours of graduating, but had dropped out. Okay, so 2,600 near grads, like within 15 hours of graduating. So what we did was we helped them create a chatbot to reach out to these students. And here are some of the metrics and numbers that came back, right? So we reached out to them via text. 1,900 of them opted in. They engaged with the chatbot. and 187 of them re-enrolled. And we were able to do that without a lot of extra burden on their staff, right? Because, yeah, you guys are busy, and you get busier, it seems. All right? In every sector, in every organization I talk to, the problem is always the same, right? So what the executives say is always very similar. I need defendable decisions. But right now, at this moment in history, they all say, you know what? The need for our services has greatly increased, and my availability of capable resources is shrinking. My first question is like, where do all those people go, and how do I get on that train? You know, how do I stop working and still get the bills paid? You know, but that's not for me right now, right? But this is where AI can stand in that gap and really bring some transformative things. Okay, so some of the key takeaways from today, right? Every single industry. You know, if you'll let me get philosophical for a second, on my way here, I thought, AI, what's a good analogy for that in terms of, when was the last time we saw something that just came and revolutionized and became critical in every aspect of life, in every single industry? And for me, as a former mechanical engineer, I guess I still am one, you know, I'm on this plane, I'm looking, I'm like, plastics, polymers, think about it, right? What did we do before plastics? It's in everything. And yes, while there are some things that are, you know, there's some health issues, you know, that's why we do BPA-free bottles now. And yeah, you don't want to use plastics for, you know, like heavy-duty operations sometimes, unless you treat it specially, and so on and so forth, right? It's everywhere, you know, and I think that for me was just realizing how pervasive AI is and will continue to be. I mentioned earlier I have 5 kids, and I feel like AI right now is kind of how I look at my 5 kids. It's like, man, you guys are so awesome. You have so much potential. If you would just do the right things, stay out of trouble, you're going to be amazing. But you know what? They're going to make mistakes along the way, and that's okay too, right? But it's all about how we recover from our mistakes. So, you know, I'll close with this. Responsible innovation requires responsible innovators, and I am so grateful that we have a room full of people who are so dedicated to breeding this next generation of responsible innovators. And thank you so much for your time. I'd love to just take some questions.
Yeah, we've got 15 minutes.
Yeah.
We've got time for questions.
Okay.
So 10, 15 minutes. Who wants to jump in?
Yes, sir.
Ryan, you don't need a microphone.
I don't. You mentioned several pain points, like we need defendable information. Are there other things on that list that you're hearing that can be identified as problems and pain points that your company continues to solve?
You know, I think defendable decisions, at the end of the day, it all comes back to our view on the world is, okay, how can data and analytics and AI, right, solve the question of the day, and how reliable is that data? Like in some ways, because, you know, in the field of data and analytics, AI is just kind of the latest buzzword, right? We've been doing this. You've just got to be smart about what you use to predict. I'm sorry, I don't feel like I'm answering your question very well. You know, each sector has their own issues and challenges that they're dealing with. But I think at the end of the day, the process can be very similar. And where some of this innovation, what I love to do in my Data for Good projects is I love to bring experts from one field into another, right? So for example, I was sharing with Melissa earlier, last year I was working with the United Nations, and they're trying to figure out, okay, you know, how do we figure out how countries will respond to serious shocks, and how people will respond to serious shocks in the system. And I brought to them one of our experts from our risk modeling team from our financial services sector. And he listened to the problem and he said, you know what? In the financial world, this is how we kind of look at that kind of problem. And here's kind of how we would model a solution for that. And that blew their minds, like, whoa, we've never, you know, the UN said, we've never looked at the problem like this. And now there's a patent pending so again, it's just trying to figure out how do you innovate? How do you take things that you same people, traditional problems, but just come at it from a different way, right? Whether it be a data source that you've not used before. And in this day and age, there's so much data. There's so much data. Like it's been a long time since I heard, oh, we don't have the data for that. Like there's always a way that we can hack at that from a data science perspective. Sorry, I feel like that was long-winded, but we can talk a little more. I'd love to.
No, I love it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
answer a little more for you. Yes, sir.
I'm not sure how to frame it exactly, but since we've been discussing whether it's ethical or unethical, how do you wrestle with the notions of like descriptive ethics versus normative ethics? In the sense that if we all believe that the same things were right, maybe we could converge on something and say, yes, this is ethical. But that's not the case, right? We have different societal values. What might seem ethical in one society to value certain things, in another society or subgroup within a society might have different norms. Now what? I feel like now the culture wars will play out in data sets.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and yeah, that is a complex question. But for us, I think, however wide you cast your net, right now our perspective is however wide you cast your net, whether it's society from a company standpoint, from a geographical standpoint, or wherever you draw those lines, let's just start drawing them so that we can be clear about, okay, here's where we've drawn our lines. So when I was also in Europe last year, one of the people in the audience was in the ministry in the tax ministry, and they had just been in the news, raked over the coals by journalists saying, you know what, when you were trying to fight tax fraud with your analytics, you were really unfairly picking on this particular demographic of people. And and they didn't really have a great response for that. So when we started talking to them about, hey, trustworthy AI, you need to make sure things are transparent and set things up in such a way so it's defendable. So the goal isn't to get rid of bias. The goal isn't to get rid of some of these objections, right? But it's to be able to say, you know what? We recognize that based on where we've drawn the lines from an ethics standpoint, these people are in, these people are out, and then you can have the conversation starting there, right? Because right now, people aren't clearly drawing those lines from an ethics standpoint. So it's very hard to have a conversation when the boundaries are so loose. Does that make sense at all? But yeah, I don't have a firm answer for that in terms of the right way, but we need people to pick a way, and let's start there, right? Other questions? Yes, sir.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed your speech today here. I am Sok Kang here from UTSA. You mentioned AI literacy here. Then how do you foresee then the AI divide? There can be some AI divides, disparities between those who know AI well and those who have some background and experience, and those who don't have. Do you foresee that AI divide can be an issue, or?
Yeah, for sure. The AI divide for sure can be an issue. Thank you for bringing that up, because one of the points I didn't make in one of my slides in an effort to go a little faster was just that, when they're talking about which jobs and which sectors, right, are a little more susceptible to AI replacing white-collar workers, that right there, I mean, a lot of these studies will say, and if you look at the technology and where it is today, they'll say, hey, if you're in the creative realm, you're pretty safe, because it's still pretty hard for AI to be creative, right? If you're forgive me, I'm trying to remember what that study was, but essentially, there are a couple ways that divide can widen, and we've got to watch out for that. Because we will start leaving the people who are either too afraid of AI right now and don't want to mess with it, or just don't have the resources or the ability or the capacity to understand how it works and how they can get conned or how it can be dangerous to them. That's going to be an issue to watch out for and to train for. One more question? Okay. Anybody? Yes, ma'am.
Well, and I wonder, building on that, there's such a big difference between using AI that's free and AI that's paid. So how do you envision that not creating an even bigger divide?
Yeah, Well, no, I mean, yeah, I mean, all I can do is agree with you, right? Like, that's the way it is right now. The AI, this generative AI is expensive, right? It takes these huge server farms, you know, and right now only the private sector and governments can afford that. Interesting that you have, you know, large corporations like Google and Microsoft making a good portion of it available for free, but at some point, you've got to think, I mean, for me to ask a question of Bard or Gemini, Google Gemini or ChatGPT, right? I'm spinning up the server farm and I'm just kind of leaving it hanging there. Like, at some point, you got to think about the carbon footprint. That, you know, this whole digital pollution is a whole nother topic and a whole nother industry that is spinning up. But back to your question, like, yeah, that'll cause a divide, and we've got to figure out. We've got to figure it out. Yeah.
Round of applause.
Woo!
Thank you. Thank you so much.
What a
That
great
was,
audience. Thank you guys
awesome
for your attention.
and provocative. So I have a couple of quick announcements. This will be on our YouTube channel. So if you didn't take pictures of all the slides, or you want to make sure you can go back and check stuff out, we did record this, and you can check that out on Academic Innovation's YouTube channel. Evening reception, just a reminder, 5 to 7 in the La Vita room. And, you know, just talk to people, connect, and ends at 7, so you can go get dinner if you want to afterwards, or you can go back to your rooms or go out and party. But we're flexible. So that is coming up. Don't forget to use the hashtag Innovate, SATX.